Hello again. So now we're up to chapter 26. So now we're going to talk about the Second World War. Okay. So as we talked about in the previous chapter, we saw what ended up happening in Germany and in Italy at that point in time. So their nationalistic movements, their movements toward more dictatorial, I guess you can say leaders, with the use of Mussolini and of course Hitler coming to the forefront in Germany. So Hitler was responsible in September of 1939 with his first invasion, which was going to call for the Second World War. He invaded Poland. Okay, so that was the start of the Second World War. So there's various causes that kind of led up to it. So why Germany ended up starting this war. So there was an aftermath of the Versailles Treaty after World War I. Because if you remember correctly, Germany was faced with billions of dollars of reparations that they needed to pay. They also lost a lot of territory. So there was economic fallout that ended up affecting Germany, boundary conflicts, hyperinflation, where their currency was basically deflated, and a severe depression. So that was basically the reason why Germany ended up calling for the war and invading Poland to kind of start it. In 1936, we also had another war that was coming about within it. So that was the Spanish Civil War, led by Francisco Franco. Hitler basically learned various lessons from this war. He basically learned that Britain, France, and the Soviet Union could not contain fascism. He said that fascism was basically going to start to spread. We knew that it was already occurring in Germany. You know, of course, Italy is going to come about to it, and then we're going to see it also in Japan. He also learned that Britain and France, they did not want to fight another war. They're basically still recovering from the First World War and all of the internal conflicts that they were faced with economically and all those other things after the big war that they ended up fighting. So let's talk about German rearmament. So if you look at the details of the treaty that was signed by Germany after the First World War, they had to pay those reparations, but they also had to dismantle their army. So Hitler focused on the rearmament of his military. So in 1933, Hitler removed Germany from the League of Nations that was set up by Woodrow Wilson. In 1935, he successfully rearmed his nation. So once again, creating an army, a military force to be reckoned with. In 1936, he reoccupied the Rhineland, saying that territory should truly belong to Germany. So he's going to take over that territory once again. And then in 1938, he annexed Austria because Austria was part of, Germany at that point in time, very close relative. He thought that they could basically just take that territory and bring it to the fold. Okay, he's also going to take over the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia. The Sudetenland was probably one of the most pivotal territories that ended up taking over. The Sudetenland is very well known for its fuels. So we're talking about easy access to oil and coal and other things that he's going to need, not only for his military, but also for his country as a whole too. So it's going to play a very pivotal role in his acquisition movement. September 3rd of 1939, so 2 days after the invasion of Poland, Britain and France declared war on Germany because of the, an attack on Poland for no reason. Germany basically dismembered Poland within the period of 4 weeks, basically faltered completely. Germany later on also attacked Scandinavia. They attacked Denmark and Norway, then swarmed Belgium and the Netherlands, and then later on made way over to France. They believed in Blitzkrieg. Blitzkrieg was in lightning war. So basically what that means is that you're going to have men on the ground that are also going to be fighting and attacking. And then you're also going to have airplanes that are basically going to be bombing the cities. So it's basically just full on war. That's basically another take on total war that's going to basically take over most of Europe thanks to Germany. So Germany's now also going to use their air force, their Luftwaffe, but they're also going to use their soldiers on the land to basically fight, the Allied powers pretty much. There's also going to be a global war. So like I mentioned, there's going to be other countries that are going to be involved. So Great Britain's going to start to be involved. It's also going to have an impact in Africa too. So Africa, if you remember correctly, is, still under control of the colonies. So their colonies part of Europe. So they're also going to have a role in it. There's going to be battles that are going to be fought in North Africa and elsewhere, by the Germans as well. So let's talk about the war in the Pacific. So Japan basically struck Pearl Harbor in Hawaii on December 7th, 1941. So because of that, there's going to be a lot of different things that are going to happen. Germany is going to basically declare war on the United States. So the United States now at this point, they have to deal with Japan, because Japan attacked them, but now Germany's calling for war against the United States. So the US are basically going to join the Allied powers right after Pearl Harbor was struck. Germany is going to continue to move eastward toward Russia. By 1941, they overtook Yugoslavia and they moved on to the Soviet Union with Operation Barbarossa. If you ever study how Germany tried to attack Russia, it was very slow movement and not perfectly planned, in my opinion. They started very, very late in the year. We're talking about like June, July in the summer months. They thought that it was going to be a quick, swift maneuver where they can overtake Russia very, very quickly. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case. It basically drudged on into the winter months. And we're talking about, dealing with winter conditions, in November, December, January of the winter season, in Russia, which is basically faced, with a lot of snow and harsh conditions. So unfortunately, that was poor calculation, I think, on Germany's part as they were starting to take over Russia or try to take over Russia. In terms of internal conflict and the racial war that's going to start in Germany. So Jews, the Roma, and the Slavs were considered subhuman. Okay, the Roma. The Roma are basically gypsies. They're people that just basically move. They don't provide, in the eyes of the Nazi Germany, they don't provide any economic value. So they basically thought that they were considered subhuman race. So what ends up happening is that Hitler's going to call for a period of ethnic cleansing. So Himmler directed his SS to begin massive population transfers. So the movements of Jews, to the ghettos, and eventually from the ghettos, they would move them to concentration camps or labor camps. So they're going to start forming these forced labor camps. There is a map in the textbook. Pay attention to where these concentration camps are located. Majority of them, of course, are going to be in Poland and in Czechoslovakia. There's not going to be much on German territory. The reason why is that they thought that if they're going to be killing these people within the concentration camps, that the blood would then basically contaminate the German soil. Nothing would grow. That's what they thought mentally, unfortunately. But they're going to start a lot of these, like I said, population transfers, these movements of these racial groups, to the concentration camps and the like. There's also a chart in the textbook that goes over the final solution plan, which basically what are they going to do? How are they going to do it? How are they going to exterminate these people, to kind of prove their ethnic cleansing point. The race to build the bomb. There's going to be a race to build the bomb between Germany and, of course, the United States, and other nations are going to be involved in trying to, first enact the nuclear bomb. So thanks to us, we have physicist Robert Oppenheimer. So he had a lab in New Mexico and successfully built the atomic bomb. Tested it out. It worked. We had the mushroom cloud. We were ready and prepared. Heaven forbid we needed to use it. Okay, so let's talk about the Allied nations and how the Allied nations stood against Germany. So Hitler invaded the Soviet Union in June of 1941, as I mentioned before. So he's going to start in the summer months. It's going to take a while. So he attempted to take Stalingrad in 1942, 1943. Didn't really work well. Like I mentioned, we're talking about overextending your lines. We're talking about dealing with harsh conditions. They weren't successfully able to take over that city. In January of 1943, the German commander basically surrendered against the Soviet army. And the Germans were eventually driven back westward, back onto their mainland. In the Western Front, so we're talking about in territory in France and in Italy, the U.S. invaded Italy in 1943. Italy's government basically deposed Mussolini, and he was actually surrendered to the Allied forces. By April 1945, the Allies crossed the Rhine into Germany, and then by May 7th, Germany basically surrendered against the Allied powers. Okay, so it was basically a quick movement. Once the U.S. got into the war after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, it was a very quick movement for the Allied nations to unite together and to fight against Germany and Italy. So slowly they ended up surrendering basically almost back to back. The war in the Pacific. So let's talk about the war against the United States and Japan at this point in time. So in the fall of 1944, the U.S. Navy basically destroyed Japan's surface ships. So that was kind of like the start of the war. By July 26th the same year, the Allies basically wanted Japan to surrender. Japan, unfortunately, is not going to surrender. They refused, and eventually they ended up using the atomic bomb on Japan. So Truman, he was the U.S. president at that time after Roosevelt died. So after Franklin Delano Roosevelt that we talked about previously, he passed away, Truman took over. On August 6th of that year, Hiroshima was actually bombed. It destroyed 60% of the city. You would think once again that Japan would actually surrender. Didn't occur within that time frame. 3 days later, they set up another bomb on Nagasaki. By August 14th, Japan actually surrendered against the United States and against the Allied powers. And that basically ended the war. So the war basically lasted from 1939 up to 1944-45, because we're talking about the peace treaty time. So it's going to take a period of time for recovery. It's going to face a lot of effects, specifically on Germany, on Italy. It's going to, once again, very similarly to the First World War, cause a lot of economic problems. We're going to talk about hyperinflation, specifically once again for Germany, where the German mark is completely devalued, and basically just rebuilding, because there's going to be a lot of destruction after the World War on European soil, on European territory. So it's going to take a while for things to get back to normal, but it's also going to cause a little bit of problems that are going to lead up to the Cold War, which we'll talk about in the next chapter. So race once again for nuclear bombs and those types of things. So we're going to kind of see the development now where things are slowly starting to change on the militaristic level, from just, basic fighting on soil to now, use of these type of weapons against each other. So we will see that in the next chapter. All right, thanks.